Hello and welcome to another episode of It's a Rare Thing. And we have a very, very rare person with us today because all too often on this series, as you well know, we talk to people who have the condition Syringomyelia or Chiari Malformation. And they talk quite eloquently and openly about the conditions that they face with those conditions. However, there is another side of the coin. You can have a Syrinx and perhaps Syringomyelia and remarkably be symptom-free, or if not symptom-free, become almost symptom-free. So it's with that in mind that we are talking to a wonderful person today, Kimberley. Kimberley joins us via the power of Zoom to talk to us about, well, actually, her story. So Kimberley, hello, welcome.
Hi, Jess. Lovely to see you.
Full disclosure, we do know each other, don't we?
We do.
And it was it was quite surprising. It was one of those moments I remember when I was talking about, I think, my Syrinx and Syringomyelia, and you said, well, I had something very similar too.
Yeah. And I think that that's really interesting, isn't it? Because I think it's also common when you have something rare that you can feel like actually nobody else has had it, and or the likelihood of you meeting someone outside of a support group or clinic is almost impossible. So actually to meet someone and know them and then end up having the same thing, albeit manifesting differently, I think is kind of quite unheard of, really.
Well, I remember listening to your story, and we'll go through it in some detail in a minute. I remember listening to your story thinking, aha, maybe there's hope for me just yet. Now, and I think that was kind of a false dawn for me, really, because look, everybody's different. Everybody's condition is different. And unfortunately, there are different stages and different variations. When you're talking about the spinal cord, there isn't a kind of a one size fits all solution, prognosis, problem, diagnostic, treatment, or anything like that. But I do remember thinking, I wonder. So really, your story is so important because anybody out there who has just been diagnosed with a Syrinx can listen to you and think, oh, okay, well, maybe I'm not going to be like Jez. Maybe I'll be more like Kimberley. So look, how did it all start for you?
Okay, so it really started after having my first daughter. I was 31 and had a normal natural labour. But afterwards experienced really kind of quite severe symptoms in my lower back, in my legs. And I think in that kind of soup of new babies, that everybody was like, oh, well, this is really normal. Of course you're going to feel like this. You've gone through a major kind of shift and trauma to your body. You know, it just needs time to heal. But it was really, really pronounced. And I would see other people running around with their babies, and I would be unable to lift my daughter. So I wouldn't be able to pick her up. I'd have to do it in a really certain way because it felt like my legs were going to collapse under me. Or if I was on the floor, I couldn't just get up off the floor. I'd have to kind of kneel up and then push myself onto a sofa. Does that make sense? And this
it does. So what was it? Was it weakness in the legs, or was it
weakness,
pain as well?
Pain. It was pain and weakness, and it was something that I'd never experienced before. So I did loads of kind of research, which is my kind of thing anyway. And coming from a family where my mother had really kind of strange and rare illnesses, I felt very kind of able to do that kind of research. You know, what's going on? Sure. Found loads of stuff about pregnancy, after pregnancy, ligaments, but none of it fitted for me. But I think what's really interesting is that I started to go to the GP. I went to physios, osteopaths, you know, all of those kind of things.
Yeah, that's what you do. I mean, I think I had very similar sort of symptoms in the early days, and you kind of blame yourself when it's lack of exercise. I'm not really fit. I could be doing more to help myself. And you go to a GP and they say, you could be doing more to help yourself. So, have you tried this? Have you tried? No, I haven't. Yeah. I'll give that a go.
Yeah, exactly. And I think you get more and more. I certainly got kind of more and more desperate because after you go through a certain number of months, you go, oh, this is okay. Oh, actually, Do you know what I mean? This is 6 months, or this is 12 months. Do you know what I mean? This is 18 months of not really being able to walk and being taken to places. And one of the symptoms which I think was really significant for me and changed everything in terms of how I was listened to, if that makes sense, is nobody was really interested in pain,
Right.
which I think is really
Yep.
interesting.
Yep.
Not interested in
No.
pain. It's like, well, this has happened to you, your muscles are probably weak, blah, blah, blah. But what I was having, which was significant, was that I was having pins and needles, and pins and needles in both my feet.
Right.
But pins and needles, like I said, it was like wearing boots. Yeah, like having wellies on. So it was like wellies of pins and needles, exactly the same, like up to partway to my calf muscle,
Yeah.
on my
Yeah.
all the time.
So was this after 18 months, or
Yeah,
how long did the pins?
yes, it's
Right.
still
Okay.
so it's still going on.
Okay.
And I saw
So
physios who told me that actually it was just because one of my legs was slightly longer than the other, and that they should put build-ups in my shoes. Yeah.
yep.
Like, all right, okay.
Yep.
I
Had
thought this
that one.
can't be right.
No.
Yeah, I thought it can't be right. But it was the pins and needles that even if I was lying down, they would just be fizzing all the time. And it just felt really kind of profoundly wrong to me. I thought that feels like nerves, that's something
Of
else.
course. Were
Um,
you
yeah.
walking? What was you mentioned you're walking? What was your walking like at this point?
Um, I'd say that I could walk, but I was in a lot of pain.
Right.
And the thing that was really difficult for me, I know this sounds odd, but was standing still. Does that make sense? I felt
Mm-hmm.
like
Mm-hmm.
standing still, I couldn't rest on a leg.
Mm.
Um, I'd sort of yo-yo backwards and forwards between my legs. It just, yeah, just awful. And I just thought, oh, well, maybe it's just my core. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. No.
Maybe
Of
it's
course.
just
Yep.
all of these things. But what happened towards kind of diagnoses, and I really wasn't walking at all. I mean, it was really hard, and always in pain.
Did you get to the stage where you were using sticks or a wheelchair or anything like that, or did you just
No,
do
I was
what some
avoiding
people
it.
do exactly, which is what I is you avoid it.
Yeah.
You avoid walking. Absolutely.
And also, I found sitting really hard as well.
Yeah.
I felt like because of where the pain was, and this might be just me, but I felt like I would often put my hands under my top of my legs so that I was like lifted slightly. Do you know what I mean? Because it
Yeah.
felt like everything was fizzy anyway. It was just not right. Anyway, I went back to the GP, and I just had to keep saying this isn't right. I just feel like something's wrong. And in the end, they said, well, we think maybe we should have a look at your bones. Yeah. And I
Mm.
felt like, well, okay, but it just didn't feel like mechanical to
No.
me. It didn't feel like a bone. It's not like, oh, you've dislocated something, or I don't know, it felt different. But he said, I think you should see an orthopedic surgeon. So they'll look into it. But it's going to take a while for you to get that referral. So I just said, well, I'll go private to that same person then, because I just felt so like trapped in it,
Mm.
really.
Mm.
And when I saw him, he just did the normal things of, can you move your leg like this? Can you turn your head? The exercises and the maneuvers that I've been tested at every single person that I had gone to. And he said, well, what we'll do is we'll do an MRI.
Okay.
We'll see. We'll see what's going on, because there's nothing that I can tell by touching your body, that feels odd. So they did an MRI, and I paid for it privately.
And they're
And
not
I
cheap,
remember,
are they, Kimberly? They are not cheap.
well, then, which was about, I don't know, um, about 15 years ago, something like
Okay.
that.
Yeah. So we go back 15 years. So okay.
Yeah, it,
Yep.
it was about 1,500 quid, for an MRI, and
Wow.
that's a lot of money. But I think
Yes.
but I
But
was so
you
desperate.
get to the stage where actually you'd almost pay anything.
Oh God, yeah,
That's how
anything.
I felt. I mean, I was going to I was actually in the beginning, and this is years before I was diagnosed. I was buying into the Harley Street name. I was going to
Yeah,
these, and I say this with well, actually, it sounds like no respect. I was going to
yeah,
these Harley Street kind of charlatans, because they
yeah,
rented a room in Harley Street. I was prepared to pay anything, just get rid of this horrible, what I thought was the beginnings of MS at the time, but what something awful anyway. But of course. You'll pay anything. So you paid for the MRI.
yeah. I paid for the MRI. I'm one of those people who found it really, really horrendous as an experience. I know other people find them fine.
Well, they're not
I don't
pleasant,
know
are
why I
they?
didn't like it,
They're not
but I think I
pleasant.
was really kind of wound up about.
Mm.
I was just worried. I was just worried. And anyway, the following day, so I had it in the afternoon, and the following day, I got a phone call from the hospital saying that they wanted to redo it. And I thought, what? They said, we just think we'd just like to have a look at something that we might have found. And I thought, oh my God, and I
Yeah,
said,
sure.
but you know what I thought first of all was, how am I going to pay another 1,500?
Oh, bless. Did
Yeah,
the
I thought, my
did
God.
did the gorgeous NHS come to
Yeah.
the
And they said,
rescue?
you're not paying for
Yeah.
this, which also made me worried.
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah, of
You know
course.
what I mean? Because I thought,
Oh my
what's
God,
going
how
on?
urgent is this?
Yeah, exactly. So I went in and had another one done, and this time they did it with a contrast dye,
Hmm.
and took me in and out of the MRI scanner. And then I went back to the orthopedic surgeon who contacted me and said, "Oh, we've got the results." And he said, "Well, you'll be pleased to know that your bones are all looking great." So
Hmm.
I went, okay. And he said, but we have found something in your spinal cord. And at the time, I just sort of thought, oh, thank God. Because it's so ridiculous, isn't it? Because I just thought you found a reason.
Yeah,
You found a
yeah,
reason for
yeah.
this. And I think I'd also, think for people, it's quite often that need to have a diagnosis is so massive, because you just feel like you're, I don't know, clutching at straws or nobody knows or whatever it might be.
When you're in a lot of pain, discomfort, you've got mobility issues, you
Yeah.
think that there's something very wrong in a neurological sense, you do want answers. You want some form of closure so you can begin treatment or to just get better.
Yeah. And I think there's the things that they were giving me, which was like pain relief, which didn't work, or nerve blockers, which didn't work. All of these things. I just thought they're making me feel worse. I'm not getting anywhere. But interestingly, the orthopedic surgeon said to me, now what you want to see is a neurologist because they're always really interested in this kind of thing. And they'll do a kind of Quincy on it. Yeah. Like they'll be like a detective.
Oh, right, okay.
You
Sorry,
know,
I thought that was some deep medical terminology I'd never come
yeah, no, no,
Well,
it's like some
you said we'll
70s
do a Columbo. I would have got you, but
Quince. So anyway, and then it all went
so he
wrong.
told you so he sat you down and said, look, we found something in your spinal cord. He then told you what it was, a
Yeah,
syrinx. Yeah.
and he said,
And
yeah,
where was your
can you?
syrinx, Kimberley? Where was it? Abouts in the
It's
spinal
quite
cord.
high up. It's
Right.
quite high
Okay.
up in my spine, and he was showing me these images. I remember, and I remember standing up round the table, seeing this thing, which was like this, anyone who's got it will know this kind of long lozenge in my spinal cord. And I
Mm.
remember thinking, it's like so near the edge of my spinal cord. Does that make sense? The
Yeah.
edge is the
Yeah.
edge. It's
Yeah.
like it's full. But I don't know if I was really understanding what he was saying because he was kind of just passing me on at that stage.
Mm. Mm.
We'll send you here now. So at that point, because I didn't know what it was or anything, I imagined that something would happen and I would be better because they'd found something. Anyway, and then I went firstly, I saw someone from Addenbrooke's, and he said to me, have you looked this up online? And I said, yes, I have. And he said, horrendous, isn't it? He said, don't look it up again. And I just thought, oh what do you do with that information? You know, when you don't know where you are, you don't know what it is, and you've just had a name of something. And I found that started to trigger all kinds of things, which were just sort of like I felt like part of a very kind of worrying narrative suddenly. Does that make
Yeah,
sense?
of course it does. Absolutely.
Well, of course you know, but yeah, I just thought,
Would
what
he's
is going
right
on?
in many respects. Dr. Google is not the place to go to because
No.
even with just I was going to say simple childbirth, but even with the common medical issues or conditions that aren't frightening, you only hear the very worst stories on Dr. Google. That's the problem. But where else do you go? I
No, I
mean,
know.
you've got to go somewhere for that information. I do find that sometimes consultants have a very limited window of time that they can give you. You've got a 10, 15-minute appointment. You've got so many
Yeah.
questions. You're suffering from so
Yeah.
many ailments. There are so many imponderables, and you kind of
Mm.
you're being ushered out the door before you've even asked the first
Yeah.
question, really. So it's
Yeah.
difficult.
And I think when they're kind of narrating the letter about you
Yeah,
whilst you're in the consultation, and you think, oh no, I've waited for this moment of answers. I think that's really difficult, especially when it's something so kind of odd or that you don't know about. So I had to have another MRI done then. And
a third one.
yeah, third, I had so many. I had a third one
Wow.
done. And then I saw the neurologist at the local hospital at North Norwich. And he said to me, okay, this is what's happening. This is what it is. It's quite large, and we're not sure whether this is causing your symptoms, but it seems too much of a coincidence. And he did all of the things where they did all the trackers and traces to make sure that signals were getting through my body from my brain, and they were thorough in that investigation. And when I saw him again, he said to me, okay, so actually these are some things that you need to think about. And I said, well, what do you do with this? What happens? And of course, he explained the kind of decompression operation, opening up, the spine really
Sure.
to leave more
Yeah.
space. And he said, but we can't just do that. We have to speak to every consultant in the country to make a decision. And I was honestly, at that point, I just thought, what is happening? I
Mm,
just suddenly was so like, it was like an out of body
mm,
experience
mm, mm,
of what's this narrative?
mm.
And he said, but then that doesn't mean that it'll necessarily help. We have to, you have to be aware of that. And I just, I didn't really know what to say. It was like I felt bombarded with things, and
In
anybody
some
would
in some ways,
say,
it's really reassuring. We've got to consult. We've got to get together. There's a group of us neurosurgeons, neurologists who get together and discuss these cases.
yes,
And
yeah,
on the other hand, you go, well, hold on, is this so incredibly
yes,
dangerous or life-threatening or just incredibly rare? Look, everybody,
yeah.
it's incredibly rare. That's why this podcast is called It's a Rare Thing. But at the time, when people say things like that to you, you go, oh my gosh, what on earth's going on? So you didn't go through, you didn't need or you didn't have the decompression.
I didn't have it. I wasn't offered it at
Right.
that point because what they said they wanted to do was that they wanted to monitor it. Yeah. So what they wanted to do was to do an MRI every 6 months to see what happened and then increase that time. Yeah. So then it would be once a year
Sure.
because they wanted to see whether it had formed, whether they think it formed through just me being born with it or whether it was through a trauma, whether the childbirth
Yeah.
had caused it, you know. Um, so
But
I,
that's all
I
well and good. How were you physically at this time, though? So you've had the diagnosis, you've had the MRI scans. What's the walking? What's the pain like?
the same, the
Ah.
same. But I decided that I had to try and make sure that any of the other things around it, I was just aware of if I had pain that I could tense up around the pain and that I might not be able to do anything with the original pain, but I could do with something with the pain around it. Does that make
It
sense?
does. Yeah.
Like by not being tense or by doing different exercise or, going back to an osteopath. But when I then went back to osteopaths or chiropractors and said, this is what's happening, they actually didn't want to do very much with me because they were worried about that happening in my spinal cord. And so they didn't want to do any manipulation or anything. So that became quite kind of interesting, because that just adds to your anxiety. And this is a happy ending story. So
we're going to get there, folks.
So I don't want everyone to go, oh my God,
No, this is just this is normal. This is what we go through. This is what we go through.
This is the truth.
Absolutely.
Exactly. And I remember going in, and it was interesting listening to some of your other podcasts, and it kind of resonated actually, because I remember saying, well, what do I do in the meantime while we're just doing this first monitoring? And he said, do not get pregnant.
Wow.
And it was really, I don't know, it was just horrendous. It felt like an absolute any agency I had been taken away from me. And it wasn't as though I was thinking at that time that I wanted to have another child then, because I've been in so much pain, it felt impossible. But then for someone to say, you can't, was like, hang on a minute. All these kind of emotions flooded in.
And we're human. We always want things we can't have, right? You told you can't have something, you suddenly want it. You didn't want it beforehand. You weren't that fussed, but now.
Yeah, and it was like, don't do it.
But this is quite common for women to be told this, who have got this condition.
Yeah. And I said, why? And they said, because the pressure on you, if you went into labour, let alone the pregnancy, could force the fluid and your brain to push down into your spinal cord. And I was just like, what? Do you mean it just sounds so horrendous? And I was just sitting there, and I remember, as a 30-something-year-old, 33-year-old or something, sitting in this room with my mum. Yeah.
Wow.
Just thinking, what? I can't, what do I say? And he said, I know, it's a bit Kafkaesque, isn't it?
Okay.
And I just, you're basically talking about, a Kafkaesque nightmare, and that's my body that you're talking about. And you've just told me not to have another child. And that feels quite weighty to me as a conversation.
So were you still working at this time, or you were taking time off for maternity
I was working,
leave,
but I was just in agony, and I didn't work. I only walk, I used to walk before I had my daughter, and it would be about a 20-minute walk. But actually my husband had to drop me off outside the door and pick me up every day. It was the only way I could do it.
Yeah.
And I'm a lecturer, and I had to change how I did my tutorial, so I didn't go up the stairs as much as possible. And it was impacting kind of everything really at that point.
And it's such a difficult thing for people to wrap their heads around, those colleagues of yours or the management that you're working alongside, because most people can't pronounce Syringomyelia, let alone spell it, let alone understand it. It's so incredibly rare. What support were you getting at work at this point? Were people broadly empathetic, sympathetic, or were you just met with sort of bemused, well, I can't see anything wrong with her?
I know, that's the thing, isn't it? I think that I'm so different now. But I mean, I didn't really share it beyond my my kind of line manager. I didn't go higher into the institution. Didn't share it. Not because I was like, I don't know, I wasn't ashamed or like I didn't feel like it defined me or anything like that. I was just I just felt rubbish. I just felt rubbish. And I think I just felt like I was just trying to actually just get on with my day-to-day being.
Yeah.
And be a mum
Yeah.
and do my job and do all of those things and try and be positive and try and kind of keep strong. But I just had so many questions around it.
So let me just move you on to sort of post that initial period of diagnosis. What
Yeah,
then? How did the months and the years unravel after that? Because you didn't have the surgery, you didn't
no.
take any medication.
I took medication, but only, yeah, like trying to have different kind of nerve blockers because they were most worried about me having the pins and needles.
Sure.
But nothing worked. So actually, I ended up not taking anything
Mm,
because
mm.
it just made me feel worse.
Well, they dull the senses as well, don't they? I mean, I've tried
Yeah,
baclofen and tizanidine, and they're kind of they might alleviate some of the symptoms, but I don't need the brain fog, and that's the one thing I won't tolerate. So it's like, no thanks, not going to do
yeah,
that.
exactly.
You know.
Exactly. And I think the thing is that, if you're somebody who, well, most people are, but if you're using your brain when you're
Mm.
working, you're having to articulate things very quickly on the spot, you need to be in it. And I felt like everything else was a bit kind of blurred anyway. So yeah, basically then what happened was that this is where it starts to kind of change, I suppose. And I started to think, well, I'm just going to be monitored. I'm going to be monitored. And the I remember the neurologist saying to me that they had just operated on somebody, and they said they weren't sure whether he'd be able to walk again now. Um, and I suppose the most important thing through all of this, I would say to people who are being diagnosed with it, or anything actually that's really kind of rare, is don't just be spoken to like you're just going to take it. I think that sometimes you wait so long for those appointments and then you're spoken to in such a way like, oh yeah, this is Kafkaesque or something, or yeah, don't do this, or it's very doomy, isn't it? And you think, you're going to move on to another patient here, and I'm going to leave the room and go home and have to digest this. And so I think it's really important to hold on to your position, to be able to ask all the questions, even if they're pushing you out the door, to ask more questions, and to feel like it is like something that you have control over, even if your body is doing other things. I think that's really important.
I think that's really important. But you are, I don't want to use this term because I think it's a really unfortunate term. I was going to say you are a success story because you've come through this, the other side.
Yeah.
You are walking, talking,
Yes.
relatively pain-free.
Yeah.
Okay.
And most importantly, I had another baby. So,
Yay. There
you
you
know,
go.
there we
So,
go.
how did you get to the walking, talking, pain-free person that you are now? Do you know, don't you know, how long did it take?
It took a long time, but I
Okay.
think it was I never think it's one thing. Um, what they ended up saying to me at the hospital is that they felt like I had had it since birth,
Yeah.
and that they felt because they had looked at so many MRIs that it was stable, that there was no movement in it. It hadn't got any bigger, and it had remained the same. And they saw this as a kind of a real positive. Um, and so they were saying that they had an open door policy where if symptoms came back or got worse, that obviously I could come back. But they felt that they didn't need to monitor me now. Um, and so I kind of went on to think, okay, well, what are the other things that I can do to make myself stronger? Yeah,
Good.
I knew that
Absolutely.
I had some hypermobility in my body. I knew that that would be making it worse and making me feel more wobbly. I knew that the kind of tension, as I said, around the pain was there. I couldn't get rid of the pins and needles for very, very, very long time. And actually, as I'm sitting here now, I've got them today. So I still have that on and off, and less so now than I used to, definitely. I can definitely cope with all of that. Um,
So it's still
and
it's still there a little bit in the background, nagging you, reminding you that it still exists.
yes, but you know what? I don't connect
No,
it to it
no.
now at all. And actually, what was really interesting is thinking about talking to you was that I suddenly remembered all of the narrative and
Yeah.
realized in a really lovely way how far away I was from it and how lucky I am. Do you know what I mean? to be away. And maybe if I'd never had that MRI, I'd obviously never know,
So
you
what
know.
was it then? Was it exercise? Was it changing your lifestyle? Was it changing
Yeah,
habitual behavior in some way or?
it was very, very slow. And I saw a chiropractor for a long time and just asked whether I could just feel a little bit more stable in
Yep.
my pelvis. And he said that what was really interesting is sometimes people come in and it's almost like you have to hit them over the head with a stick or a log, and that sort of makes their body change into something else. It just kind of goes, okay, I'm going to be different. But he said with me, it was like I had to just be poked very, very slightly because my body was so sensitive that he couldn't really do the same things as he normally would. And he was amazing, and he worked with someone in America to look at how they might be able to help me. Knowing that when I went in, I said, "Don't say you can cure me because that's not possible, but can you help me with this?" And so he would say things to me like, rather than like if I felt slightly better on a day, I'd want to walk a little bit more. And when I say a little bit, I really am talking tiny
Yeah,
walk.
sure.
But he said, do not walk for more than 5 minutes. Yeah. And then just turn back. And we're going to do this very, very slowly. And I think what happened was that I started to build up the things that I could with the rest of my body. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. Yeah.
And that kind of strength helped. But I suppose for me, and I think it's important, especially for the women out there or the people who want to have families, and this is, I just think, really important information, is that the reason that it was all right for me to have a baby a second time was that I had to have an elective cesarean. And the cesarean was planned so that I wouldn't go into labour. And the neurologist wrote letters to everybody to put that in place. And that was the thing that kind of safeguarded any future kind of trauma that might destabilize something. And so I think if there are people out there that are thinking, about having children, or they may be like me and they might feel all right now, but still know that this is part of them, that it is. I know everybody's body is different, but there is possibilities there. And I had a healthy pregnancy and I felt fine through my pregnancy, and I had a cesarean and I recovered from it a lot quicker than I obviously did when I had my first
I think
child.
that's some
So
really, really good advice. And I have to say at this point as well, anyone who's just been diagnosed with a syrinx or syringomyelia or Chiari malformation, there's two things you should do. Take Kimberley's advice. Don't be talked to. Okay, have a conversation. That's really important with your GP or with with one of your consultants. And secondly, do look up the Anne Conroy Trust. So that's the society, that's the charity that actually does give really useful information, advice, and guidance to those with syringomyelia or syrinx. Anne Conroy Trust, that's Anne without an E. Look it up. It's there on Google, but don't research it through Dr. Google. It's
no,
just don't do it. Just don't do it. Ask the right questions to the right people. And
yes,
Kimberley, you're in Fine Festival. I mean, it's great to hear that actually you didn't go down any surgical intervention. You didn't really go through any drug therapy. You just gently just went through a program of exercise, lifestyle changes to strengthen what needed to be strengthened, and hopefully,
yeah.
touch wood, that's the last you'll see of the little man crawling around in your spinal cord.
Yes, I hope so. And I think the thing is, though, that I do think that my the opportunity I had to say, oh, I'll have different treatment, or I'll try this kind of exercise, or I'll try that, really, I know isn't always a possibility for other people because their
Sure.
symptoms are so much more
Yeah.
profound than me. But if you're like me, and it is something that you can absolutely live with, and you can forget, then I think that there are kind of absolute possibilities for positive futures. And of course, there are absolute positive futures for those people who are suffering as well, because as I think I've heard you say on many of the other podcasts, that you don't have to be defined by it.
No.
But I think that any of these things change who you are. and not always for the worse, but you become someone else. You have different empathy, you have different awareness of your body. You don't take things for granted in the same way, and I think
I,
that's something that's really important.
I couldn't agree with you more. It certainly gives you a different perspective on life. You do see life and others through a different lens.
Yeah,
That's for sure.
absolutely.
Kimberly,
Yeah.
thanks so much for joining us today. Honestly, it's been a real pleasure talking to you, and it's great to hear your story. You're absolutely right. Everybody's different, but I think your story illustrates that if you are diagnosed with a syrinx, it doesn't necessarily need to be incredibly debilitating or disabling.
No, no.
There is another side to the story as well. I think you've articulated that really, really well today. So thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for
It
letting
wasn't
me
that bad,
chat.
was it?
No.
I know it gave you a bit of a tingle, but I've had worse effects on people. I can tell you that, Kimberly.
I bet.
Listen, thanks so much for joining us, and you have a great afternoon and a great 2025.
Thank you so much.
So there you have it. What an amazing story, and she is truly remarkable. I've known Kimberly for, well, goodness knows now, donkey's years, and it was only after about, I don't know, 6 years perhaps maybe of knowing Kimberly that we got into the conversation of my condition. She went, do you know what? I've got a syrinx. And I went, no. And yeah, just absolutely remarkable. And it's so good to hear that actually you can have a syrinx in your spinal cord and lead a relatively normal life with some adjustments. Now, I'm not going to say it's potluck because obviously my condition's quite different and my circumstances are quite different, and unfortunately I'm not asymptomatic. But it's good to know that if you are diagnosed with a syrinx, that actually it doesn't mean the horror stories that you're likely to see when you research Dr. Google. And I'm going to say this again: if you do need some guidance in terms of what syringomyelia might all be about for you, first and foremost, speak to a professional. If not your GP, then insist on seeing a consultant and ask the questions you need answered. Go prepared. And if you're going to go prepared, one of the best sites you can go to is the Anne Conroy Trust. That's Anne without an E, the Anne Conroy Trust. And they are a UK charity, a support group that offers guidance for those with Syringomyelia and Chiari Malformation. Now I have to say, Kimberley did call me a couple of days after the interview took place, and she said, look, I think I've got my dates muddled, and maybe it was more years than I thought, and did I give the right advice and guidance? And I went, look, this podcast isn't about advice and guidance. It really isn't. It's just about people's stories, and no one's going to take everything you say absolutely literally or verbatim. So if there's a few years out here and there, don't worry. It's about your experience, and it's about people actually sort of using your experience as a barometer against their own, I guess. But it was an incredible story, and we wish Kimberley all the very best for the future, actually, because the thing about Syringomyelia or syrinx is they are incredibly unpredictable. But we're going to be positive, right? Positive. She's got this far, and I'm sure she's going to continue doing extremely well. Join us again for more It's a Rare Thing, for more stories, more anecdotes, and some more tips. Thank you.